There is a moment in every genuine journey of healing when a person stops trying to fix themselves and begins to understand themselves. At first glance, it may seem like a small distinction, but in truth, it marks the threshold between fragmentation and integration. The one who strives to fix what is broken assumes that something is wrong, that the pieces of the self must be reordered, corrected, or made to fit some imagined ideal. But the one who understands begins to see that nothing is broken in the way they once believed. They start to realize that within them live many truths, many faces, many voices, some loud, some quiet, some that contradict, and yet all are part of a single psyche longing for wholeness. A sign that you are healing through integration is that you begin to make peace with paradox. You no longer feel the compulsive need to choose one part of yourself over another. You can be strong and still feel deep grief. You can be courageous and still afraid. You can forgive someone and still feel the sting of what they did. These contradictions no longer feel like flaws to be eradicated. They begin to feel like threads in a larger tapestry, each one essential to the pattern, each one belonging. And when that realization dawns, a quiet dignity begins to return to the soul. The war within starts to quiet. You don't silence the voices inside you. You listen to them, and in doing so, they begin to speak more clearly, more truthfully. We are conditioned to believe that healing must look like resolution, that the sadness should go away, the anger should dissolve, the fear should disappear. But integration does not aim to eliminate, it aims to hold. It brings together the exiled emotions, the neglected desires, the disowned memories, and says, you have a place here. Even the parts of you that made mistakes, the parts you once felt ashamed of. They too are offered a seat at the table, and what a miracle that is, when you no longer have to hide from yourself, when you can look into your own depths and say, yes, I see you, and still, I remain whole. You begin to notice it in the quiet moments, when something doesn't go your way, and instead of collapsing into despair or lashing out in blame, you pause. You feel the pull of those old reactions, but something in you is watching now. Not coldly, not with judgment, but with care. The part of you that used to take over in moments of pain no longer has to fight for attention. It's being listened to, and in that listening it softens. What used to be a reflex becomes a choice. What used to be a burden becomes a message. And what used to be chaos becomes insight. You will still have days when your inner contradictions confuse you. You will still feel the push and pull of conflicting desires, the dance of light and shadow. But now, you no longer try to amputate parts of yourself to make life simpler. You stop trying to resolve the paradox by force. You begin to sit with it, breathe with it, even honor it. You understand now that the psyche is not a machine to be optimized, but a living organism with rhythms, instincts, and depths far beyond what the surface reveals. To integrate is to remember that the soul is not singular, it is multiform, and each part speaks in its own language, with its own wisdom. What once felt like internal chaos begins to resemble a kind of inner ecology. Everything has its place. The anger that once exploded or got suppressed now becomes a sign that something vital in you needs protection. The fear that used to paralyze now becomes a signal that you are approaching something sacred, something unknown. The grief that used to drown you now becomes a wellspring of tenderness. You don't run from these states anymore. You walk with them. You recognize that they are not in your way, they are the way. To reach this place is not the end of healing. It is the beginning of true healing. Because only when you stop judging your contradictions do you begin to experience peace. Only when you stop striving to be one thing do you finally allow yourself to be all that you are. You discover that you can be tired and still move forward. You can be uncertain and still decide. You can be broken and still holy. And when you realize this, not as an idea, but as an embodied truth, you begin to treat yourself differently, not with indulgence, but with reverence. You stop demanding clarity where there is mystery. You stop forcing wholeness and begin to invite it. You become less interested in being right and more curious about being real. You stop asking yourself, "What should I be feeling?" and start asking, "What is this feeling trying to show me?" And in that moment, you become your own companion, your own guide. You become trustworthy to yourself. That is when you know you are healing through integration, not because the pain is gone, but because you are no longer at war with it. There comes a point on the path of healing when the things that used to overwhelm you begin to shift in meaning. The emotions that once felt unbearable, the reactions that seemed to hijack your body and mind, the moments of inner chaos, they don't vanish, but they begin to speak a different language. What once felt like an attack now begins to feel like a message. And this shift does not come from control or suppression. It arises naturally when you stop running from your inner life and begin to turn toward it. One of the clearest signs that you are healing through integration is this: your triggers no longer rule you. They reveal you. There is a moment when something painful happens. Someone says something, a memory resurfaces, a situation echoes an old wound. And instead of reacting with the same old panic, blame, or collapse, you pause. Maybe only for a second, but that pause is a sign of inner freedom. It means you are no longer fully identified with the wound. You are starting to witness it. You are beginning to relate to it, not from it, and that is no small thing. It is the beginning of conscious relationship with your own psyche. When we are fragmented, our pain controls us. We mistake our pain for our identity. We lash out or shut down, not because we are bad or weak, but because we are still trying to survive an injury that was never given space to heal. Triggers are not the problem, they are the residue of something that remains unresolved. They are fragments of meaning that have been buried deep within the unconscious, waiting for recognition. And so, when you are triggered, it is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that something in you is still alive, still trying to speak. The path of integration does not ask you to eliminate your triggers. It asks you to become curious about them. Instead of recoiling in shame or defensiveness, you begin to ask, what part of me is speaking right now? What memory is this pain tied to? What is this reaction protecting? And when you ask in this way, with sincerity and without judgment, you are not just analyzing yourself, you are offering yourself compassion. You are inviting the unconscious to speak, and it will. You may discover that your rage is protecting your innocence, that your jealousy is masking your grief, that your numbness is a survival instinct developed in a time when feeling too much would have destroyed you. When you begin to see your emotional reactions as meaningful expressions of something true, something sacred, something unfinished, you stop fearing them. You begin to understand that your psyche is not betraying you when it reacts. It is trying, in its own way, to protect you, to warn you, to bring something important into awareness. This shift, from fear to curiosity, from shame to understanding, is at the heart of healing through integration. You become less reactive, not because you've learned better behavior, but because you've developed deeper relationship. You are no longer trying to control the storm, you are listening to the thunder. And sometimes, just the act of listening is enough. A feeling that once would have overtaken you completely may now arise, be named, and dissolve without needing to be acted upon. This is not detachment, it is presence. It is intimacy with your own experience. There will still be moments when you get overwhelmed, when you fall into old patterns, when your reactions surprise you. But even then, something is different. You recover faster, You reflect more gently. You ask better questions. You don't spiral into self-loathing. You don't tell yourself that you're broken. Instead, you recognize, this is a place I have not yet fully met within myself. And that recognition itself is healing, because now you are working with your inner world, not against it. Eventually, you begin to notice a new rhythm in your life. Things that used to provoke you no longer hold the same power. Situations that once would have made you feel small or helpless now invite you into deeper understanding. You don't just survive emotional storms, you emerge from them wiser. You begin to trust that your reactions are not random. They are rooted in history, in memory, in meaning. And that trust allows you to soften. It allows you to move through life with more grace, not because you have mastered your emotions, but because you have befriended them. You stop fearing the parts of you that still hurt. You stop seeing your emotional responses as signs of failure. You begin to recognize them as invitations, calls from within, to remember, to tend, to integrate. And as you accept those invitations, you become less afraid of yourself. You move through the world with greater integrity, because you are no longer splitting off from your own truth. Even the most painful reactions now feel like opportunities to return to yourself. That is when you know you are healing. Not because life no longer stirs your pain, but because you are finally listening to what the pain is trying to teach. There comes a sacred turning point in the journey of healing when you begin to realize that the people you once blamed for your pain are not the source of your suffering. They are mirrors, not because they were innocent or because what they did was justified, but because the emotional intensity they stirred in you was not just about them, it was about what they touched inside you. Something buried, something forgotten, something unloved. And in that realization, something profound happens. You stop projecting. You begin reclaiming. This is one of the clearest signs that you are healing through integration. You no longer cast your shadow onto others in order to avoid facing it within yourself. You start to notice the subtle ways you once externalized what you could not hold inside. The anger you directed at someone for being selfish was, in part, your own disowned assertiveness. The envy you felt towards someone's confidence was really your own longing to be seen, your own silenced desire for freedom. The disgust you felt toward another's weakness was really the fear of your own vulnerability, still hidden beneath years of performance and strength. In the early stages of healing, we often look outward for what is wrong. We see other people as the problem. If only they would change, be kinder, see us more clearly, treat us with more love. But integration does not allow us to remain in this position for long. It begins to show us that what we cannot tolerate in others often reveals what we have not yet made peace with in ourselves. This is not a moral judgment. It is a deep psychological truth. We project what we reject. We assign to others the traits, emotions, and longings we cannot yet bear to claim as our own. To reclaim what we have projected is not an easy task. It takes courage to look at someone we judge and ask ourselves, what part of me is reflected in this? It takes humility to admit that the qualities we despise in others may also live within us, simply hidden under layers of denial or shame. But it is only in this act of reclaiming that we begin to come home to ourselves. We stop slicing off parts of the psyche to preserve an illusion of purity or righteousness. We allow the uncomfortable truths to return to us, to be held, to be understood, to be loved. And in that return, something extraordinary begins to happen. The people who used to irritate us, enrage us, or make us feel small no longer hold the same charge. Their behavior may still be inappropriate, but it no longer hooks us in the same unconscious way. Why? Because we've brought the projection back. We've stopped asking them to carry something for us that we were afraid to carry ourselves. And this, more than anything, is the sign that integration is occurring. You reclaim what is yours, not to shame yourself, but to become whole. You begin to understand that the shadow is not the enemy. It is simply the part of you that was once exiled because it was too much for you, or for others, to accept. Your anger, your ambition, your sexuality, your sadness, your craving for attention, these are not flaws. They are energies. And when these energies are split off and projected onto others, they return to us distorted and painful. But when we reclaim them, they become part of our inner strength, our wisdom, our aliveness. Think of how often we give away our power by projecting it. We look at someone who stands tall in their truth and we feel threatened, not because they are doing something wrong, but because they are doing something we haven't given ourselves permission to do. Or we fall in love with someone, not just for who they are, but because they awaken a lost part of ourselves. A beauty, a passion, a playfulness that we forgot we had. And when that love fades or becomes painful, we think we've lost something. But we haven't. We've only lost the mirror. The task now is to turn inward and find what was being reflected, and make it our own again. This work of reclaiming is not cold or analytical. It is a labor of love. It is the return of your full humanity. It softens your heart, not only toward yourself, but also toward others. You start to see people more clearly, not through the lens of your unmet needs, but through the truth of who they are. And even when you must set boundaries, even when you choose distance, it is not out of blame, it is out of clarity. You no longer need others to carry what you now hold with grace. To stop projecting is not to become perfect. It is to become honest. It is to see yourself more fully and to love what you see, even if it frightens you. It is to take responsibility not just for your actions, but for your inner world, for the stories you tell yourself, the roles you assign to others, the emotions you attribute to the outside world that are, in truth, trying to come home to you. This is the quiet power of integration. It returns you to yourself. It gathers what has been scattered. It invites you to meet the one person you have spent your life avoiding, your whole, undivided self. And when you do, the world no longer appears as a battlefield. It becomes a mirror, reflecting back not your wounds, but your readiness to heal. There is a subtle but undeniable transformation that occurs when you begin to feel safe inside yourself. Not safe because life is predictable or people are always kind, but safe because you no longer abandon yourself in the face of pain. It is one of the clearest signs that integration is unfolding. When the storm comes, and instead of seeking to escape it, you find yourself able to remain present, to stay with yourself, and to offer the very comfort you once begged the world to give you. This inner safety is not the absence of pain, but the presence of a self that can hold it. For much of our lives, we are taught, directly or indirectly, that our emotions are too much, that our grief is inconvenient, our anger is dangerous, our fear is weakness. And so we internalize this lesson early. When intensity arises, we turn away from it. We numb, distract, perform. We run from our own inner experience as though it were a threat, and in doing so, we fracture the parts of ourselves that carry the greatest emotional weight. The child who wept in secret, the adolescent who screamed in silence, becomes strangers to us. And we are left feeling unsafe, not because the world is always cruel, but because we no longer know how to be with ourselves when the world hurts. But healing changes that. Healing through integration is not about achieving constant peace or happiness. It is about building the capacity to stay with whatever arises in you. It is about turning toward the trembling parts of yourself instead of pushing them away. And the first time you do this, truly do this, you will feel it in your bones. The panic arises, and instead of abandoning yourself to the old escape routes, you remain. You breathe, you listen, you place a hand on your heart, or speak to yourself with a kindness you once sought from others. And in that moment, something ancient inside of you softens. What you are doing, perhaps for the first time, is parenting your own inner life. You are becoming the witness, the protector, the nurturer of your own psyche. And this changes everything. It means that when pain comes, you do not need to project it outward, collapse into shame, or pretend it isn't there. You can say to yourself, "Yes, this hurts, but I am here, and I will not abandon you." This is not a performance of strength. This is strength in its truest form, gentle, steady, rooted in presence. This inner safety allows for an emotional honesty that was previously too threatening. You can now tell the truth about what you feel, not because someone else approves, but because you do. You begin to realize that you are no longer at war with yourself. You don't have to choose between parts of you. The part that wants to be held and the part that wants to run can both exist. The part that feels brave and the part that feels terrified can both have a seat at the table. And you, now aware, now integrated, become the one who holds that table together. This kind of safety is quiet. It doesn't always announce itself, but you'll feel it in the way you speak to yourself in the dark. You'll feel it when you make a mistake and no longer berate yourself. You'll feel it when you are grieving and don't rush to fix it. You'll feel it when you are scared and can still take the next step. It's not perfection, it's presence. It's not control, it's care. And once this presence begins to root itself in you, something else shifts: your relationships. You no longer seek people to complete you. You no longer demand that others regulate your emotional world. You no longer expect the outside to provide what you have now begun to cultivate inside. This doesn't make you cold or self-sufficient in some rigid way. On the contrary, it makes you more available for genuine connection because you're not clinging or performing. You're showing up as someone who can be with themselves and therefore be with others more honestly. And yes, there will still be days when the old patterns return. Days when you feel fragile or overwhelmed, and the impulse to abandon yourself is strong. But you'll notice something new. Even when you fall, you don't fall as far. Even when you retreat, you return more quickly. You remember that you are not alone, not because someone else saves you, but because you have become a steady presence to yourself. You are learning that your emotions are not dangerous, they are invitations. They ask not to be solved, but to be witnessed. This is how the soul learns to rest, not by erasing pain, but by becoming a home that can hold it. You become the sanctuary you have been searching for, not in some abstract or poetic sense, but in the quiet, daily act of being with yourself, without judgment, without exile. And in that space, healing does not feel like a goal, it feels like a return to wholeness, a return to the self who was never truly broken, only waiting to be held. And when that self is finally met with unwavering presence, you realize, this is what it means to feel safe. There is a quiet moment in the healing journey when you begin to notice something unfamiliar. You no longer fight your past. You no longer recoil from the memories that once haunted you or rage against the roles you were forced to play. It's not that you forget what happened or pretend it didn't wound you. You simply stop needing the wound to define you. You stop needing to be in constant opposition to your history. And that shift, from resistance to relationship with your past, is one of the clearest signs that healing through integration is truly taking place. The past, when unprocessed, becomes a weight we carry through life without realizing it. It informs our choices, shapes our reactions, and distorts our perception of what's possible. We think we are moving forward, but the inner compass we're using was built on unfinished stories, on survival strategies we no longer need. And so long as we remain in opposition to that past, trying to outrun it, deny it, or destroy it, it quietly continues to run our lives. It's only when we stop fighting it that something miraculous begins to unfold. We see it not as the enemy, but as the beginning of our becoming. There is a misunderstanding in our culture that healing means erasing the pain, rewriting the story, or finding some perfect redemption arc. But true integration is much humbler and far more powerful. It means looking at what happened and saying, yes, that happened. And this too is part of who I am. It means reclaiming not just the light of our history, but the darkness, the parts where we were powerless, the moments when we betrayed ourselves just to feel loved, the choices we made out of fear, confusion, or deep unmet need. These are not stains upon our soul, they are thresholds, and when we dare to walk through them not with bitterness but with reverence, they become the very ground upon which our wholeness is built. To make peace with the past is not to condone what was wrong or harmful. It is to refuse to remain imprisoned by it. It is to recognize that every wound carried a message, every heartbreak a lesson, every silence a cry for recognition. And once you start listening, truly listening, you find that even your most painful memories begin to speak differently. They no longer scream for revenge or escape. They whisper of truths you are finally ready to understand. You start to see that you were never the villain you believed yourself to be. You were surviving. You were adapting. You were doing what you could with what you had. And the same is true for others, those who hurt you, who failed to love you, who projected their own wounds onto your life. This doesn't mean you excuse their behavior. It means you stop needing them to be evil in order to feel justified in your pain. You let go of the fantasy that if they had been different, you would be whole. And instead, you begin to embody the truth. You are whole, now, because you have stopped abandoning any part of your journey. As this inner reconciliation deepens, something extraordinary begins to happen. The story you tell yourself about who you are starts to change. You are no longer the broken one, the lost one, the one who was never enough. You are the one who lived, the one who endured, the one who chose to turn toward the ruins and build something sacred from them. This is not a performance. It is not a rebranding of your identity. It is the natural result of returning to what was once disowned and saying, you belong to me. The past stops being a place you visit only in shame or rage. It becomes a teacher, a mirror, sometimes even a friend. You begin to draw strength from the very things that once made you feel weak. You remember how much you've carried, and that remembrance does not bring pride or pity, but a deep, quiet respect for your own soul. A respect that asks nothing but to be honored, and in honoring it, you stop trying to escape your story. You begin, instead, to live it fully. And no, it is not a straight path. There will be moments when the old wounds ache, when the past feels close again, when grief or anger stirs, seemingly out of nowhere. But now, you have the inner capacity to meet these moments without collapse. You can greet the returning pain not as a regression, but as an invitation, another layer ready to be seen, another truth ready to be loved. And each time you do, your sense of identity expands. You become less defined by what happened and more defined by how you've chosen to meet it. In this way, healing is not a return to who you were before the pain. It is an emergence into who you are because of it. Not in spite of it, not beyond it, but because you turned toward it and wove it into the fabric of your becoming. You took the shards and shaped them into something whole. And that is how you know you are healing, when the past no longer defines your limits, but reveals your depth. One of the most beautiful signs that healing through integration is occurring is when your life begins to move not from fear or wounding, but from inner alignment. This shift is not sudden. It is quiet, subtle, and sometimes hard to notice at first. But then one day you find yourself saying no without guilt. You choose rest instead of running. You speak a truth you once swallowed. And you realize, with a stillness that hums deep in your chest, that something has changed. You are no longer performing the life others scripted for you. You are beginning to live from within. For a long time, we learn to navigate life based on the expectations of others or the defenses we've built to protect ourselves. We say yes to be liked even when we mean no. We stay silent to avoid conflict, even when something inside us is screaming to be heard. We take on roles, not because they fit us, but because they made sense in an environment where our truth felt dangerous or unwanted. And slowly we begin to forget who we are, not because we never knew, but because we buried that knowing under years of survival. But healing through integration brings you back to that original knowing, not as an idea, but as an experience. You begin to notice what feels true in your body, what resonates in your heart, what aligns with the quiet voice inside that was once drowned out by noise. And rather than dismiss it, you start to trust it. You make choices not to prove something or avoid something, but because they reflect what matters to you. That is the shift. From reaction to authenticity, from protection to expression. This does not mean you never feel fear or doubt, but fear stops being the loudest voice in the room. You begin to recognize it not as a command, but as a signal. It might still whisper, "What if you fail? What if they leave? What if you're wrong?" But now you can hear those questions and still choose to move forward. Because something deeper has taken root. A self that no longer needs external approval to feel valid. A self that no longer confuses safety with silence. The signs of this inner alignment are often quiet. You find yourself enjoying solitude, not because you're avoiding people, but because you've become good company to yourself. You stop chasing people who don't see you, not because you don't care, but because you've stopped needing to convince others of your worth. You begin to create, speak, build, and move, not to be accepted, but because you feel compelled from within. And even when others don't understand, you don't abandon yourself. You understand that not everyone will resonate with your path, and that's no longer a threat. It's a truth you can live with peacefully. There is a moment in this process when you look back at the person you used to be, the one who over-explained, over-apologized, overcompensated, and you do not feel shame. You feel tenderness. You see how much that version of you was trying to belong, to stay safe, to be loved, and you thank them because they carried you to this place. And now, you do not need to erase them. You simply outgrow the need to live as them. You bring them along, folded gently into your evolving self. Living from alignment is not about having it all figured out. It's about being willing to listen inwardly, again and again. It's about noticing when something feels off and having the courage to investigate it. It's about choosing integrity over image, truth over comfort, and wholeness over approval. These are not always easy choices. They may cost you relationships, familiar roles, even certain dreams, but what they give you in return is something invaluable, a life that is truly yours. And this is where the deep joy of integration lives. Not in perfection, but in presence, in waking up and knowing that your choices are not governed by fear, guilt, or the desire to please. In feeling the rhythm of your own truth guiding you moment by moment, in no longer needing to split yourself in two to be accepted. You begin to trust that even if others misunderstand, even if the road is uncertain, your inner compass is strong enough to carry you. This is not the end of your healing, it is the beginning of living. Living as someone who no longer hides parts of themselves just to fit into small spaces. Living as someone who can hold their past, their pain, their dreams and their doubts in one expansive self. Living as someone who moves with clarity, not because they are always certain, but because they are always in conversation with their soul. And that, above all else, is the gift of integration. Not just to survive, but to live from the center of who you are. If this message stirred something within you, if you recognize the quiet signs of your own healing or long to feel that inner alignment, then make a commitment to yourself today. Begin by pausing, listening, turning inward instead of outward. Ask yourself not, what do others need from me? But, what does my soul need from me right now? Let this be the beginning of your return to wholeness. Start with one choice that honors your truth. Speak one sentence you've been afraid to say. Sit with one feeling you've been running from. Let each small act be a vote for your healing. You don't need to do it perfectly. You only need to do it honestly. The path is already within you. Trust the direction it points. Thank you.